Hi everybody, meteorologist Joe Cioffi here. Monday, July the 30th, 2018. Hope everybody had a terrific weekend. We are at the last moments of the month of July, of course tomorrow being the last day of the month. We are at the seasonal peaks of average temperatures for the summertime, and after we get past about August 5th or 6th, we're going to start to see the average highs and the average lows begin their slow descent downward. And then when we get into September, October, and November, of course, we know that that descent begins to accelerate as we move our way into the autumn months. But we've got one more summer month left, and that is the month of August. So I guess you could look at this in a couple of ways. Either you could say that the summer is half over based on when the first day of fall is, when we get the vernal equinox around, I guess, September 20th or 21st. And the other way of looking at it is that the three warmest months, June and July, are done, and that we're 2/3 of the way through. So I guess it depends on how you view summer. I just kind of take it as it goes. I tend to look more toward the warmer months versus when the actual equinox takes place, because temperatures are already starting to do their thing long before the sun crosses the equator, be it going from summer to autumn or going from winter to spring. Okay, so let us take a look at what's happening. It's actually, for the most part, the weather across the United States is being dominated by the trough that's affecting the eastern part of the U.S., and then we've got the ridge that's affecting the west. So the outcome of that is the fact that the weather's wet and a bit on the cool side, at least today, in parts of the northeast, and getting increasingly humid. Out to the west, we have excessive heat issues now that have kind of migrated their way up into the Pacific Northwest, where we have various heat advisories and excessive heat warnings for the states of Washington and Oregon, but we don't really have them up now for California. So the very hot air is pushed up into the Northwest. And notice, as far as weather is concerned across the country, it's a relatively quiet summer day, really. Yes, we do have some thunderstorms in places, but we don't have any kind of outrageous severe weather going on, so that's a good thing. We don't have any tropical storms or hurricanes to worry about, so that's a good thing too. And as far as the areas that are actually getting some weather, I'm just going to bring up the eastern satellite here, and then we'll go to the radar. You know, we're back to this trough in the east scenario this week, much like last week. It's a little different. The axis of the trough is a bit further to the west this time around. Downpours are perhaps going to occur in different areas. In some places, the downpours will be more continuous than others. But at the end of the day, we are gradually transitioning into a very warm and humid pattern, and maybe setting up for some hot weather in the east late in the weekend or early next week. But for now, two areas of rain that we're looking at today in the northeast, and they show up well on the radar. Let me bring myself here so I don't lose myself in all of this. But here's a look at the local radar from Fort Dix out of Mount Holly. And there's rain that's in southern New Jersey and touching eastern Long Island. That is one area that's come up from the south. There was some heavy rains today across the Delmarva Peninsula and back over into eastern Virginia. So that area is moving out to the northeast. And then you've got the second area of rain that's coming into the picture in eastern Pennsylvania. That area is is forecast to weaken in the next few hours. So I don't know how much of that is going to survive, but it kind of gives you the idea of what we're dealing with when it comes to this sort of thing. Now here's the Storm Prediction Center, and by the way, they've just updated this to include an area of slight risk of severe in parts of northeastern Oklahoma, northwestern Arkansas, and southeastern most Kansas. You see, we have these pockets of marginal risk, sort of scattered around, because we don't really have any kind of organized low that's sort of driving one concentrated area of severe weather. And then, of course, you have the usual scattered showers and thunderstorms that are running around over parts of the mid-Atlantic, down in the southeast, and, of course, over the state of Florida and the Gulf states. So, as I said, this is kind of a typical, in my view, this is really sort of a typical summer day. Hey, Nick Cortese, thanks for hitting Super Chat tonight. I know you're looking for hot and humid weather. You're going to probably start to see that late in the weekend, early next week, this coming weekend. But this week we're going to be dealing with fighting off with clouds and downpours from time to time. It'll start to get very warm and humid toward the end of the week. Here's the Weather Prediction Center's rainfall forecast for this week with that area of some places 4 or 5 inch rain amounts on the Florida Panhandle, on up into the western Carolina mountains, western Virginia, and into West Virginia. You get into that 4 or 5 inch or 3 to 5 inch range. Johnny Quest is not going to like this because that's going to mean more downpours for you or for him. You can see the amounts do tail off a little bit, although you do have a finger of 2 to 4 inch rains for eastern Pennsylvania. And given the fact that they had a foot of rain last week in many areas in eastern Pennsylvania, the threshold for flash flooding is pretty low. So a couple of inches of rain, or even less than that, will probably set off some flooding issues. So you folks watching from eastern Pennsylvania or the eastern half of Pennsylvania probably should pay close attention to the weather this week. Out in the west, it's still bone dry. We've got heat issues in California. We've got fire issues as well. So no sign of any wet weather coming, and really there wouldn't be this time of year because this is, summertime in the west. It hardly ever rains in Southern California in the west in the summer. Boy, I'm a little mixed up today. Sorry about that. It hardly ever rains in Southern California, or for that matter, most of the west in the summertime, because of the fact that the ridge likes to be there a lot of the time. And you get the monsoon stuff, but other than that, as far as widespread rain is concerned, it's going to be a tough sell. All right, so where are we going with the pattern? Let's take a look at what our friendly neighborhood GFS model is doing today. And in fact, before we even get to the surface map, I'm going to go to the upper air, because I think that's more important as we watch this next upper trough swinging across the Great Lakes and in the middle Mississippi Valley. This trough is kind of like what we saw last week, except it's further west. It also is not as persistent as that trough was, so it really peaks out and then starts to weaken fairly quickly as we move into Wednesday and Thursday. At the same time, by the way, you got this big upper high off the East Coast that's building back westward. So that is going to be key to whatever happens late in the weekend and early next week as far as hot weather is concerned, because once we lose that trough in the middle of, down from the Great Lakes down to New Orleans, so right along the middle or just east of the Mississippi River, that ridge is going to try and build its way back westward. So that is going to have an impact on temperatures and start bringing them up maybe back into the 90s early next week. Here's the GFS going into Saturday and Sunday. You can see that ridge in the Atlantic building back westward into the southeastern part of the United States, and you got a bit of a ridge punching up along the East Coast. Now, it doesn't look to me like it's heat that lasts more than a day or a couple of days, because we do have the next shortwave trough dropping into the east, going into, now we're at August 8th. It's not a particularly strong shortwave, but it'll probably be enough to cut the heat off after a few. And then as we go into the longer range, looks like a bigger ridge wants to build around mid-month. Now, if this is correct, this could mean for perhaps a longer stretch of 90-degree weather once we get to, say, August 10th or 11th, and lasting into about the 15th or so, right through the end of the forecast period. So we'll have to wait to see if models confirm this idea, but we have seen these periodic occurrences of the ridge, of a strong ridge popping up in the eastern United States. So if that's the case, maybe the models are telegraphing this idea for the middle of the month. the new month of August. We'll see. In the meantime, I just want to take a look at the European, which doesn't go out quite far enough, just to see what it has to say. And of course, same idea with the trough in the east for this week, and it does try to build that ridge back westward going into the weekend and early next week, perhaps a little bit less so than the GFS does. And then looking as if it has a bit of a stronger short wave that it wants to drop into the northeast later next week. So I think the idea of whatever hot weather that we may wind up going into this weekend and into early next week in the east will only last for a couple of days before some kind of front comes through and cuts it off. Now, beyond the 10-day period, I don't exactly know where how to play it out, since we can't see the European out further than that. So we don't know whether it's consistent with what the GFS's idea is. I think from reading from what I saw over the weekend on some posts for folks that could get to see those longer range European models, kind of had the idea that the GFS has of going warm, but let's see how this week plays out. Here we have on the U.S. map. So you look at the GFS. In fact, you know what? Before we do that, I'm going to switch to the NAM, because at least the NAM will give us the way the radar is supposed to look. Because when you look at the GFS this time of year, where it's got this this sort of huge area of green representing rain, it's not representing the actual radar echoes. So it gives you the impression when you look at it that it rains nonstop for 5 days, and that's just not the case, obviously. Tonight's rain's moving out to the east. You'll notice in the northeast it doesn't have much. We do have some weather overnight into tomorrow morning in parts of Ohio and Kentucky, with some downpours and a few thunderstorms, and also along coastal North Carolina. And then back through Texas, we have from northwest Louisiana, south and west across northeast Texas, and then westward over toward Del Rio. We are seeing some downpours and thunderstorms there. And then, of course, we get a wave of moisture that tries to bring in some rain up the coast, but doesn't really do very much. The NAM is not really all that impressive with it as we move into Wednesday. Then it starts to get a little bit stronger with the rains into Pennsylvania, the Hudson Valley, and New Jersey for later Wednesday night. And then here comes another surge, perhaps, for Thursday, although, again, the models don't really hold on to it all that well. I guess part of it has to do with energy coming around the trough and how it times out with the time of day, because you certainly will get some diurnal impact when you add the daytime heating to the equation. So you start to see these things bubble up during the afternoon and evening, and then kind of taper down some during the overnight. So I guess how these little short waves kind of time out with the time of day is going to be key to who gets what and when. But you get the idea here, folks. You look at a GFS map, and it gives you the idea that we've got continuous rain, and when in fact that is not the case. And we're going to have the risk for downpours every day. Not so much tomorrow, at least for my area, but in the east, we're going to have risk for downpours and some thunderstorms every day through this week and into Saturday. And then after that is when we could see probably fewer downpours and more in the way of sunshine as we go into Sunday and Monday, as that big upper high tries to build in from the Atlantic into the Carolinas. So you get more of a west wind. This is going to help to dry things out a bit. And as we look at Sunday and Monday on the GFS, Saturday we've got some downpours and thunderstorms, but Sunday and Monday look a bit better until we get the next weather front. And this is that next short wave that drops down for the middle part of next week. Now, let's look at the tropics. Yesterday, I spent a lot of time devoting one video yesterday on just the tropics themselves, and I want to spend a little bit of time here today because we are looking at the tropical Atlantic, which is really pretty quiet for the end of July. Not that it's the most active time, obviously, but we usually start to see things, step up a bit, and there really isn't much happening because of the fact that you've got a couple of upper lows in the southwest Atlantic, and you also, if you look at the loop as it goes through today, you've got another round of Saharan dust coming off the coast with whatever tropical waves that are coming out along 10 degrees north. They just don't look very vibrant. And with the Saharan dust getting involved, that is going to cut down on the amount of convection. The other thing we were looking at is whether at some point the trough that was out in the Atlantic, the westerlies in the Atlantic, and whether the bottom of the trough out in the Atlantic was going to separate itself and perhaps do something. And models were indeed showing that idea for a number of runs. And of course, you know that now that we're into reality, it sort of backs off from this. Here is, I've got the upper air for the Atlantic, so you can see the jet in the east, the ridge out in the Atlantic waters. Now, there's that trough that tries to drop in. The last few runs have dropped the upper low down south and west of the Azores, but instead of driving it, it drives it southwestward to some degree, but it never truly gets underneath the influence of the big upper high that is sitting just northeast of Bermuda. So it just kind of sits there out in the central Atlantic until eventually it gets picked up by the westerlies again as we move into next week, or it just weakens. So it doesn't really do very much with this at the surface. This is a fairly wrapped up feature in the upper atmosphere, so I think we have to look for the possibility that we could wind up seeing this eventually warm into a warm core system, maybe a subtropical system. But just bear in mind that systems like this, when they go from cold core to warm core transition, that takes a lot of time. It can take a week or more for that to happen. These are not systems that develop very, very fast at all. And here's how that trough in the central Atlantic, you can see how the bottom part of that trough just kind of drops off. There's another upper low that's sitting south of the Azores. Maybe the models will go back to trying to take this underneath the upper ridge, but the new runs are sort of trapping it here in between the high to the west and a ridge to the east near the Canary Islands and off the coast of Portugal. So if it winds up getting trapped over there, eventually something in the westerlies will come down and pick it up and take it up to the northeast rather than take it to the southwest. So just bear that in mind. Just sort of really fast, we'll look at the European, see if the European has a similar idea, and it actually does not. When we go back, so there's the bottom of the trough. It actually drops it further east than the GFS and never really drops it south now. It was dropping it south like the GFS was over the weekend, and now it's kind of backed off from this idea. It drops it southeastward. I'm sorry, let me just run this one more time. So here's your trough in the east. We got the ridge off the east coast. We're at Wednesday now. There's your bottom trough in the central Atlantic that moves southeastward, but it never really drops as far south as the GFS has. It has it north and west of the Azores on Friday, and then it kind of opens up, and then you get something else that comes down and lifts it up and around and just takes it out into the Atlantic, so it makes it a non-event. And both models, by the way, do absolutely nothing with anything coming off the African coast. So bear that in mind. And I want to take a look once again, if you missed it yesterday on the video that I did, the sea surface temperatures. You can find this on the Hurricane Center's website at nhc.noaa.gov, and just click on data and you'll get a page it'll go to where there's links to Atlantic sea surface temperatures where you can see it on a bigger map. And 26 degrees Celsius, if we use that as the threshold temperature for tropical storm development and maintaining tropical storm strength, you can see that it is riding along or just north of 10 degrees north. So the water temperatures north of 10 degrees north in the tropical Atlantic and east of 50 degrees west are cool and perhaps not supportive of, certainly not going to be supportive of hurricanes, and they might be borderline supported for the development of a tropical storm if you've got other dynamics at play. But the ocean water temperatures are cool there. Now, you do have 28 degrees Celsius water, which we're talking about water temperatures up into the 80s, and that's once you get west of 60 degrees west, and also off the southeast coast of the United States and just off the North Carolina coast. And you've got 30 degrees Celsius water, which is warm enough to support a Category 5 hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. But that's normal, okay? When you look at the anomalies, which I'm putting up now, a large area of the Atlantic and even the subtropical, you go north of 20 degrees north, a large portion of the subtropical Atlantic between 20 north and 30 north showing ocean water temperatures a little bit below average. You go north of 30 to about 45, 46 degrees north, and you actually do have a rather large area of above average ocean water temperatures. So you've got this cool water that's sandwiched in between. And by the way, if you look at the tropical Atlantic, that cooler than average water for the most part goes clear down to the equator and even further south than that. So we've got a fairly large area of cool ocean. It doesn't mean that tropical storms can't form. It might slow the process down. It might be the difference between a system being a tropical storm versus a hurricane down the road if these anomalies continue. Don't forget, ocean water temperatures are still going to be rising in this area through the rest of this month and into the beginning of September. So, you know, the numbers themselves, you have to look at, remember, keep the anomalies in context depending on the time of year you're in. So anomalies will become perhaps a bit less important as we get toward the peak of the hurricane season, but at the same time, they will have some impact in terms of perhaps how strong these storms get. And also, I think it lends the argument when you see that the ocean water temperatures from 30 to 35 degrees north are going to be running above average. If that trend continues, I think this certainly could support the idea that we may see more storms coming out of the subtropical Atlantic, more of what we would call the homegrown variety storms, as opposed to systems that develop into tropical storms and hurricanes as they move off the Cabo Verde Islands and move westward. By the way, a look at the Pacific, because there is this question about El Nino. When we look at the ocean water temperatures in the Pacific, we're seeing ocean water temperatures in the eastern Pacific near or perhaps a little bit above average when you're looking at the equator to about 10 degrees north, although you do see some pockets of cool water in the East Pacific, and going further west along the equator, you got some pockets of cool water, some pockets of warm water. Looks like the ocean water temperatures are slightly above average across the Pacific. I don't think we have what would be we would consider a developing El Nino yet, which would impact tropical storm activity on both the Pacific side and the Atlantic side. For now, the talk is that an El Nino watch. We'll be watching how these water temperatures evolve in the coming weeks. But for now, I don't think there's really too much of an impact going on with the status of the Pacific Ocean water temperatures. I wonder if that Saharan dust, because it is coming across, if it's having some impact on the development of tropical systems on the East Pacific side right now, because we've had a few disturbances, but they seem to be having a very, very difficult time getting their act together and developing, even though some of the models have been bullish, showing some tropical systems developing. Reality has not followed suit. Okay, so something to we'll bear that in mind. I have to talk to somebody who has a bit more experience with regards to the systems in the Eastern Pacific than I do. Okay, let me come back full screen here, and we'll join everybody on the chat board. Hope, as I said earlier, if you're just coming on now or you came in midstream, I hope you had a great weekend. And if you want more on the tropics, take a look at the video I did yesterday, and because we did go into it in detail what is going on right now. So let me just say hello once again to everybody. Doug Crum, Mirtha Gunter, Delvin is on, always watching that sunrise and sunset and the daylight loss. Barbara Ryan, Rich Rothmansky, Rothmansky, got it right, and Jason Schaefer, and Reaver is on. So, Reaver, Lake Winnipesaukee this weekend, would you cancel the trip based on the rain? I would say, hold on, okay? Just a second. Let me just double check before I say something. I don't want to be misinformed, so just let me take a look here. You know, for me, I would have to tell you that if it's Lake Winnipesaukee, you just go, okay? Okay, so look, Saturday there probably will be some showers and storms to deal with, but you probably will have better conditions Sunday and Monday with the ridge building in the eastern part of the U.S. If you want my opinion, I would go. So I wish I could go with you, but I would definitely go. Late blooming summer for Jason Schaefer's idea. Well, you know, that ridge, if the models are correct, we get into a ridge position there as we go into, you know, but now on the long range carries us to the middle part of August. Yeah, and by the way, I mentioned this before when we talked about this. If you look at New York City statistics, for example, a couple of the longest heat waves that are on record occurred actually at the end of August and the beginning of September. You know, stretches of 90-degree plus. In fact, the longest one for New York City Central Park is 12 days, and that is one that was a late August, early September heat wave. So not unusual if we wind up getting the second half of the summer being hotter than the first. Delvin, extremely humid in Boston, dew point 72, 73, 74, record high 79 dew point. China, Korea, Japan has 70s for dew points right now. Only getaway from the muggy is, I don't even know how to say that, Ushuaia in Argentina. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but we get the idea. You're correct. I don't think rain. You know, rain. Nick, if you're talking about Long Island rain, with this week, I think the heavier rains are probably going to be to the west. We certainly could get some downpours where somebody could wind up with an inch or two over the next 5 or 6 days. But I think in terms of cumulative rains, I think the heavier rains are going to be more to the west, west of New York City. And let's see. Delvin sees summer is May 6th to August 5th. Okay, that we were all entitled to our differences of opinions. I get it. Hi to James, NASCAR fan. Nice to see you there on board tonight. That's right, Reaver. You tell Nick. He's always worried about things. Now you're worried about a tsunami? Seriously? Come on. Stop. Oh boy. Trying to just make sure I got every question here. Okay, it looks like Jason says, is this indicative that Northern Africa has been drier than usual, and this is why we haven't seen that many waves come off the coast? I know it's still a little bit early for that. Well, the dryness in Northern Africa certainly has contributed to the dust and the Saharan dust. And the yes, if it's abnormally dry, is going to produce abnormally high amounts of Saharan dust that get involved. You get these waves that come out, and the areas of dust move out into the Atlantic. I have to say that from watching it now, especially with the GOES 16, it seems like this July we've seen a lot of the Saharan dust. It's been a big deal. I think it may be a bigger deal this year than it has been in prior years. If it doesn't shut down, if it doesn't shut down soon, it's going to have an impact on the Cape Verde season. Johnny Quest only getting to 68 today and 2 inches of rain. You bring up a good point, Johnny Quest, because even here where we were, it didn't get out of this. Just about everybody. I didn't see an 80-degree reading today. Maybe a couple of odd spots touched 80, but the vast majority of the area did not get out of the 70s today, so it was fairly cool. Okay, so Nick, you've gone now from the tsunami to the Category 4 hurricane question for Long Island. I'll answer it this way. There have been Category 1 hurricanes. There have been a number of Category 2 hurricanes. There have been a couple of Category 3 hurricanes that have impacted Long Island. But there have not been Category 4 or 5 hurricanes. I do not believe that the physics of the atmosphere would support a Category 4 or 5 hurricane north of 35 degrees north. Okay? So that's the answer. That's my answer. I think you would have to have extraordinary circumstances to push a strong 3, say borderline 4 north of 35 degrees north. And the cooler water just has too much impact. You would have to have a really fast-moving storm like the 38 hurricane moving at 50 or 60 miles an hour where it doesn't spend that much time over the cool waters north of 35 degrees north. That really is the only way we would see that happen. And let's see. Okay, so we're good. All right, so look, folks, let's call it a night at this point. And yes, Reaver, let's hope that we never test that theory. So let's call it a night. Thanks for those of you, all of you, for being here. Really, really appreciate it as always. Just a reminder, there's an Amazon link on the descriptor of this live stream and on the descriptor of this video if you're watching it later. We are a participant in the Amazon Services LLC program, which is an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for us to earn fees by linking to Amazon and affiliated sites. And we have also an Ebates link, so you can get additional cash back on whatever retailer you shop at if you use the Ebates link. And by all means do, because back to school is coming. So if you've got back to school shopping to do, it's great if you would do it off these links. It's a good way of supporting what I do on my channel, and it doesn't cost you one extra dime, which is even better. Okay, the Joe Cioffi Weather Show, as we call it, the Joe and Joe Weather Show, will be on tonight on Facebook, and will probably be, let's say, 9:15-ish. A lot depends on what both our schedules are, but we're going to shoot for 9:15. Sometimes we come on earlier than that. Sometimes maybe a little bit later, but somewhere between, say, 8:50 and 9:15 is the usual start time. So don't forget to tune into the Joe and Joe Weather Show on my Facebook page, Meteorologist Joe Cioffi, or on Joe Rayo's Facebook page, Joe Rayo Weather. Have a great evening, everybody. Thanks again for being here. We will see you tomorrow, or maybe tonight.